Yeah.
Plus, I think it's been amped up by this being isolated in your houses and not having much to do and spending a lot of time on social media, probably,
Right,
and TV and all that.
right, right.
Yeah, I've been in, this is Aviva, David Kahn's daughter. I've been like, I have some friends in Minneapolis who are organizers there, and I totally agree with you that it is like not transports, but people who grew up there, the white people that I've been talking to who are like, very much see this as a tipping point. So just want to like completely agree with that. And like are very aware of the racial disparities in Minneapolis that are just so, egregious compared to other big cities in the U.S. They're even worse. And yeah, so I think that, and that people are pretty frustrated, a lot of young people, with other young people posting on social media and calling it like performance allyship and saying like it's not like what are you doing? And I think there's a big there's like a big tension between how do you show up, especially because the neighborhood that they were protesting in Minneapolis was like a predominantly Black and brown neighborhood that was hardest hit by Corona. So it's like, do you go and protest and then do you cause potentially more suffering, or do you not? And it sort of highlights for me as like a disability rights organizer, the immense need for like anti-ableist organizing to be able to create really mass power without saying you need to show up in person. Like, what do you do? Even if you don't want to rely on the like democratic processes, how can you, and if so, how do you organize mass power, at home? So that's it's been bringing up for people that I work with and talk to.
Very good. Yeah, and I think that the explanation that we just got from Aviva, it pushes back at some of the narrative that's being constructed that these are primarily outside agitators who are really the drivers of the protest. I'm looking at the variety of cities across the country where it appears that just spontaneously people are deciding to find out how can I get involved? How can I show my disgust? How can I show my outrage? But the last go around when they had the Women's March, some of the news media was pushing that this was basically a George Soros Antifa inspired protest, but I don't think that they have the luxury of comfortably pushing that type of narrative right now with these everyday citizens showing up. Yeah. Well, thank you for your comments. So Dr. Bob, I'm thinking that we might have to do this part 1 and part 2. I think that because of the entanglements, we might have to do some remobilization to really get a fuller presentation on this question of climate change. But it is my desire that you would proceed and then give us a little space where we can perhaps ask a few questions or make a few comments.
Yeah. Well, let me get a cell phone so I can time myself. You'd like me to talk for maybe 30 minutes or 35 minutes and then do Q&A or something?
Yeah, let's say like 30 minutes and then we'll do the Q&A.
Okay, I'll be right back. It'll take me a second.
Omowale, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. And so happy to hear you.
I was having difficulty, but I can hear you. I've been listening.
Yeah.
Ah.
No, your voice is wonderful. It sounds like a broadcasting voice.
Thank you, brother.
Yes, indeed.
I was up all night reminiscing.
Huh? Repeat.
I was up all night watching and reminiscing.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I wish we had had you on the prior discussion because we were trying to see if there were parallels to the 60s and the 70s and those great movements. But we're going to have that discussion a little later. And so with no further ado, I'm going to ask Dr. Bob to come on and let him do what he does. Thank you, Dr. Bob.
Okay, well, certainly, there never seems to be a good time to talk about climate change because the way the world keeps operating and there are so many problems out there that I remember somebody once told me when I was running Urban Harvest was that basically people are always working on what seems urgent and they neglect what's important. And this pandemic thing, you can see what it did. It closed the world down, and suddenly Congress is somehow found trillions of dollars to spend, you know, and when they could have stopped most of this, I'm talking worldwide, if they had listened to scientists 20 years ago, somebody could mute their phone. If you could just mute, because I'm hearing a lot of static or some sort.
Yeah. Yeah, we do have some feedback. Please mute your phone.
Thank you. So the climate change thing is a lot like this pandemic. We're talking about every major scientific organization in the world, the entire United Nations effort, saying, look, you need to prepare for this. This is a real problem and it's going to get much, much, much worse quickly. And so we really have to work on it. And even if it costs money, I've talked with a lot of climate activists and nobody seems to want to pay attention to that. And so I said, well, tell them that it's going to raise their taxes. Maybe that'll help, you know, because that's where it hurts, you know, for rich people. But okay, so basically, this is a really, really serious problem and it needs to be dealt with urgently. So I want to say just a few words about the science of this stuff. Basically, the reason we can live on Earth is because we have greenhouse gases. It's what keeps the planet about something like 72 degrees, this is historically, above what it would otherwise be without greenhouse gases. It's insulation that keeps the air warm enough to live, for plants to live, for people to live, for animals to live. And the problem is that we've been increasing the amount of greenhouse gases. So it's a bit like adding insulation to your house every year and suddenly it starts getting too hot or too cold or whatever. And so you can't keep heating the place up and putting more and more insulation on it, and what you're going to wind up with eventually is nobody will be able to live here. The science of this has been known since about 1890. The documentation that greenhouse gases were increasing in the atmosphere started about 1958. The first American president to warn about the problem was Lyndon Johnson, who said basically that oil and gas were causing a problem that we're going to cause more and more trouble. And I have the quotes from all that stuff. So this is not a new subject. What's new is that the problems have been getting worse and worse, just like the scientists said, or rather, in fact, that they're have turned out to be worse than the scientists predicted. So basically, just as a summary, the 10 hottest years ever measured on this planet since 1880 have all happened since 2009. All 10 of them. The hottest was 2016, then 2019, 2015, 2017, 2018. This is since 1880. And numbers 9 and 10 were both in the last decade. I mean, not this, the previous decade. And the last 8 have all been this decade. So 8 hottest years ever have happened since 2010. And just locally, Hobby Airport has been measuring since 1931. And the 10 hottest years at Hobby have been all of them since 2000, except for 1998. So all 10 hottest years since 1931 at Hobby have been since 1998. So it's getting hotter here. And I could go into any of these things. I could talk about them a long time. So what are greenhouse gases? Well, carbon dioxide, everybody has heard about that, and it comes out of a variety of places. When you burn anything, you get carbon dioxide pretty much. And so forest burning, burning oil, burning gasoline, burning methane or natural gas, any form of burning at all does this. There's a lot of other ways that this stuff gets in the air if you're just talking about carbon dioxide. But methane is a bad gas. It's worse actually than carbon dioxide in some ways. And there's a variety of ways that can happen also. Let's just say about equity. The United States has a per capita or per person emissions of 17 metric tons per person in the United States. Europe is 6 to 9 tons. China is 6.2 tons. Texas is about 23 tons. So basically, average Texan emits 4 times as much greenhouse gases as the average Chinese. So if you ever get into a discussion about reducing greenhouse gases, at some point, the Chinese representative is going to say, you know, yes, we're a big country of a lot of people and we put out a lot of greenhouse gas, but couldn't you try to cut your amount per person? Now in Texas, most of that stuff is industrial. It's not actually you and I. But anyway, and there are many other greenhouse gases. Nitrous oxide's another one. And that's comes out in various ways also. But the big problem is we're putting a whole lot of this stuff out into the air. And so I have lots of slides and I'm just sort of talking about them here. Asia and the Pacific Islands are the ones that have increased the most in recent years, and Europe is the one that has decreased even. And US and Canada have been very static, actually. Africa has been increasing as well. But as I said, they're not producing much per person. So increasing you know, as somebody put it, is that, you know, who am I to say don't use a washing machine to wash your clothes? You know, so there is that element there. But the main thing to say is that nothing is going to fix this problem unless the US itself reduces enormous amounts of greenhouse gases, which means that there's an enormous amount of change that's got to happen. That's the first thing. World Bank, I've got World Bank statistics. The top country in the world per capita is Arabia, but then comes the United States, Australia, and Canada, Russia, Korea, and then everything else is under 10 tons per capita. Brazil, 2.6 tons per capita. India, 1.7. Sweden, 4.5, and Sweden's got a pretty good standard of living. So we don't have to be doing this stuff. By state, Texas is 23.6. The next one is California, 9.3. So, I mean, that's California. Florida, 11.2. Pennsylvania, 17.1 per capita. Louisiana, 44.9 per capita. But that's all industry. Anyway, so all I'm saying is, and all this stuff I could share a slide thing, but I'm just talking about it. The main thing is that world scientists believe that to keep, right now we're at about, they measure everything in Celsius degrees above the industrial start, which is, I don't know what, 1750 or something like that. And so basically right now we're about 1 degree hotter on this planet than we were then. And scientists believe that 1.5 degrees is about the level at which things start getting really awful. Now, you might think all these fires in Australia and California, and the fact that Houston has had 2 of the 5 worst rainstorms in the history of the United States in the last 5 years, and many of these other problems that occur, that you might think that it's already at 1 degree pretty bad, and it is, but, and that's just a couple of those places. But basically, if we can keep it below 2 degrees Celsius, we have a 67% chance of surviving the human race. Now, nobody knows how well good these figures are, but we need to get down to 2.5 tons per capita, and right now Texas is at 23.5. So you really got to move. So what produces all this greenhouse gas? Electricity production. That's the biggest single one, followed by food and agriculture. So you start saying, well, we're going to have to change how we produce electricity. We got to go to renewables, solar and wind, both of which would make a lot of jobs. That's what that Green New Deal is about. There's a lot of jobs to be had if you just organize people to do it. Food and agriculture has to move toward organic. It has got to move toward a local, and it's got to stop using chemical fertilizers, which will be a big deal because most of the world runs on them. And so both of those things are going to take major efforts. And related to that was a question that was asked about meat, that beef itself is a really, really bad problem. And beef is much worse than any of the other animals, pork or chicken or sheep, any of it. And it's basically because beef burp and fart a lot, basically is what it amounts to. And in order to feed them, most of it isn't grass-fed. Most of it's feed, and which is created mostly from corn. And corn is grown mostly with chemical fertilizers. So beef is basically a really bad problem. Now, it's also not an awfully good thing to be eating from a health point of view, but people do like it. And it's an industry, even in Texas. So every place you talk about change, you're also talking about a just transition. People who are making their income doing stuff, can they be given some form of meaningful work? That's another problem. The second thing to say, so that's and the other kinds of places, transportation is nowhere near the problem that industry is. Industry is not as bad as food and agriculture and forestry, and those are not as bad as electricity. So if we start working on electricity, food industry, and transportation, we'll get a long way. We just need to basically reduce the amount of greenhouse gases we create in doing those things, and we need to do it quickly. The other things like buildings and a variety of other stuff, fixing buildings, stopping them from leaking air conditioning or heat would also help a lot, and it would help people's income. It's worth mentioning that, you know, people spend a lot of money on this stuff and they don't have to be doing that. A city, for example, could help people get solar energy on their roofs. They could help people, a city could help get a variety of these things. It'd be much cheaper to put solar on a whole neighborhood, for example. And you wouldn't have to necessarily upfront money. Conceivably, a city or a nation could upfront the money and you could just pay your electric bill to them until you paid off your solar panels, and then you've got pretty nearly free energy. And if you block up the places where you insulate your house and stuff, there's a lot of things you could do. So there's a tremendous opportunities here, especially if we were sensible and we were trying to help people, which I don't see that entirely. Let's see, moving on. Let's see what I'm doing here. Okay, so next thing I wanted to say is talk a little bit about feedbacks. Amplifying feedbacks, or so-called positive feedbacks that aren't positive in this case. Amplifying feedbacks mean that if you do something, it just makes the problem worse. So example of that would be if you get a small hole in your roof and the roofer says, you know, you better patch your roof or you're going to have trouble. And you say, well, that's expensive, I don't have the money, or I want to spend the money somewhere else. And then the hole just keeps getting bigger and pretty soon you've lost your whole living room. That's an amplifying feedback. That is to say, the hole made the problem worse, and the bigger hole makes the problem even worse than that. And we're in an amplifying feedback mode on this planet as a whole. That's the problem. So there are about a dozen or so places on the planet where the global warming is actually making it warm more. For example, snow in the Arctic reflects light, so it doesn't absorb heat, so it doesn't basically heat up greenhouse gases. It doesn't create a problem. Once you start melting that snow, you start getting darker more absorbing more heat. More heat means more ice melts. Now, the thing that's interesting about that is that all the whole climate weather patterns of the planet are based on how cold the Arctic is and how hot the tropics are. Hot air rises, and when it rises, it creates a low pressure, and cold air stays near the ground, and it creates high pressure, and high pressure moves to low pressure, so that's how you get wind. The same thing's true in the oceans with hot and cold water. You get currents. And these things have huge effects on the weather that we get here and everywhere else. They talk about cold fronts and El Nino, all that kind of stuff is all basically that sort of thing going on. So when you start changing the temperatures in the Arctic and the temperatures in the tropics, you start, as it said, it's like pointing a stick at an angry beast and seeing what happens. You really don't know exactly what's going to happen. All you know is that you really don't want to get weather mad at you. And there's at least a dozen of these things, tipping points as they're called: the Amazon rainforest, Arctic sea ice. Methane is coming out of basically frozen in the Arctic and permafrost. Coral reefs are dying, which is full of carbon because the ocean is warming. So there are a bunch of things that are just making the problem worse that will then make it even worser. And if it gets to a tipping point, you can't stop it. That's the problem. So there's no vaccine for this. There isn't any scientific solution. So we don't want this stuff to happen, and it's urgent. I have a picture of methane coming out of an ice hole in the Arctic, and people have lit fire to it just to show you the methane. And the IPCC, the International Panel on Climate Change, their latest predictions, basically, they're very worried. And it says if emissions do not start declining in the next decade, the point of carbon neutrality would need to be reached at least 2 decades earlier to remain within the same carbon budget. In other words, if we don't act in the next 10 years, we are going to actually have to do much, much, much harder efforts. And there is still a path where we can stabilize at 1.5 degrees carbon Celsius. But let me just say, I have a slide here from the IPCC in 2019. And basically at 1.5, there will be impacts and risks to all of the world's deserts, to soil erosion, to vegetation loss. And I should tell you that by my calculations, 75% of supermarket vegetables and fruits do not grow above 75 degrees. 62% do not grow above 75 degrees. So basically, you cannot let this place keep getting hotter and expect that you're going to get food in wherever you get your food. Right now, food supply instabilities are already being caused, being a problem at 1 degree Celsius. It's already happening. We're already dealing with drought and lack of irrigation water, and this is worldwide. Basically, their red thing indicates severe and widespread impacts. At 2 degrees, wildfire damage will get widespread at 2 degrees. And we'll be at 2 degrees by 2050 if we don't change quickly. Permafrost degradation will be widespread by 2 degrees, and food instabilities will be widespread. 4 degrees is what Donald Trump's policy is. His policy is 4 degrees by 2100, and it is worth keeping in mind that at 4 degrees, they do not believe that civilization as we know it can survive, and nobody between the subtropic lines of the planet will be able to live there. Which is to say, almost the entire of Africa is going to have to move to northern Canada or northern Europe or the Antarctic. Most of India, I mean, most of Central America, all of the Amazon. And, you know, the scenarios for 4 degrees are unacceptable. There is a path to 1.5. We need a 45% reduction by 2030. And net zero by 2050. That's what you need. There's a website called Project Drawdown, DRAWDOWN, Project Drawdown, which has got updates every year. It's a foundation, and it has mapped out what would actually work. But basically, there are different models of what would happen if you did this or that or the other thing, but basically, you could do it. It's not too late. It's not too late to have a reasonable future for our children and our grandchildren and for us. One of the things about it is it's possible to take carbon out of the air economically. What Al Gore mentions, what he says, it's called a tree. That's how trees they take carbon out of the air, and forests take more carbon out of the air, and they put as much carbon into the soil as they do into the wood itself by fungi and leaf matter and all the rest of it. And on top of that, trees don't reflect infrared that will heat up the planet. So large-scale forestry projects, which could employ a lot of people actually, would be a very good thing. It would be a very good thing to have more trees in Houston. Wherever you could put a tree, you should have a tree. So one of the things they mention is health and education as being a significant thing as well, is that part of the reason that, especially in rural, poor countries, there are so many people is because there's lack of health and education. And so people don't have much opportunity if they don't have a lot of children. And it would be beneficial to have much fairer life on this planet for everybody on this planet. And there is this question of who is going to suffer the most. It's routinely said that it will be the people of the global majority, the people of color on the planet. But I don't actually believe that. I think that many of the people I've lived and worked with in Africa and the Philippines know a heck of a lot more about how to take care of themselves than a lot of people do here. And I think that the problem is that we need we need equity on this planet really fast. It would be very helpful. I was asked this question about relation to COVID. And, you know, I do think that the main lesson of COVID is that all the public health and epidemiologists have been saying, at least since a book I read in the 1990s about it, their book's called The Coming Plague, The Coming, you know, and they just go through how ill-prepared the nations of the world are for this stuff. And what I think the problem is that there's very little incentive for government people to do anything to protect from future risk. People don't make money from future risk. Maybe insurance companies do, I don't know, but that might be the only place. And politicians run on, you know, who will do a better job on the pandemic this year. They run on whatever it is that the voters are worried about right now. And there needs to be, like, I think, and I see my time is almost up, so I'm gonna stop quickly. There needs to be I think, a cabinet level office on future risk that protects the people of 30 years from now. That, you know, where's the lobbyist for, you know, my grandchild? You know, he's the one who's going to have to deal with this stuff. And so, you know, people just, it's very hard to get people to vote on what some scientist says is a problem. So that's what I think is, it's a big structural problem here. And is that because this pandemic, most of this could have been avoided. Most of that 100,000 people that died here in this country could have been saved. If they had just listened and paid attention. So, and I don't think it's going to stop at 100,000 either. I think we'll probably see 3 times that amount by the time we're done, just because of bad leadership. And the fact that there is no, like I said to somebody, that I didn't hear any of the Democrats debating what to do about pandemics last year. You know, because the voters aren't thinking about the problem, right? Who is? So that's what I think is we need some way to get the risk being, and climate change is a big risk. Well, I did my 30 minutes and I thought, well, I've been yakking for a while. I could send you plenty of slides if I figure out how to. I'll shut up and see if somebody's got questions. I see there's a bunch of stuff in the chat, so.
Yeah.
Let's see.
Bob, your erudition is deep. I want to thank you for this enlightening presentation. We're going to have to have a part 2 because I think that you've opened up our minds to see this thing in a much deeper and richer way. I have a lot of conversation I want to have with you, but I want to yield to to the other people on the call for your comments. Feedback.
Sure.
Hi, this is, excuse me, this is Shara.
Yeah.
And this was really, I think you did a great job in covering a lot of information in a short time and also putting it all into perspective. I just have a quick response. You know, I'm not one for conspiracy theories because I always think the reality is always just right there in front of us, but because the reality is so unthinkable, we say, well, you know, we come up with all these other theories. But the one thing I smiled about when you were talking, and probably one of the most important points, getting back to the political side of this, that for me that you mentioned, is the Trump plan for addressing climate change. That was something that I had not heard. I didn't know that he had a plan. But the fact,
well, it's no plan.
Well, that's the point.
Yeah.
The point is that his buffoonery has led us to dismiss a lot of the things, and the people around him, the interests that he serves, continue to do the real damage. Somebody gave him that plan, but what that plan actually says is that all the time that he was saying he didn't believe in climate change, all the time that the people who, the politicians who serve the, the oil and gas industries, the big corporate interests, the big ag, they know about this. They've known about it for so long, just like ExxonMobil hid information from years ago. They have all known this. A decision has been made, and they are operating on the principle that this is going to happen because it's in their economic interest for it to happen. I think that the point that you made about why is it that nobody is concerned about the future, even though it's clear, even though the people who are saying they don't believe it, they know it. And I think the reason is, for me, it goes back to the money. Almost any problem that you want to figure out, why does this not make sense? Why are people doing things that are against human life or against equity or against even good health? It's money. And some people have figured out that they're going to ride this thing all the way out. They're going to make all the money they can. And I laughed when I saw this whole SpaceX launch thing the other day, because it reminded me of the Space Force that Pence and Trump have talked about. Yeah. I think people believe that they're gonna let this ride out, however it rides out. The point that you made about people of color being on the worst end of it initially. Yeah. And I think they're gonna probably try to figure out a way to get the hell out of here. And at least, and I'm saying it's funny because it's funny to me because it's so ridiculous what I'm saying, but I think that people are that greedy that they will take a chance on extinction for most of us to make sure that they end up with the most marbles at the end of the game. Mm.
Yeah. Well, I'm a social scientist, and so I was raised with the idea that people protect their class interests and all this kind of stuff. And there's a lot of truth to that, and they certainly mostly try to do that, okay? But I went to a human rights thing about a Guatemalan activist at the Rothko Chapel once, and afterwards we were sitting around at the reception, and I was talking to a person who turned out to be and this is 1980s, and this, he turned out to be some kind of CEO of an oil company or something like this. And I don't know what he was exactly, but I said to him something like, well, I could understand why Republicans might support George H.W. Bush because he's Wall Street type. But why on earth do they elect somebody like Ronald Reagan? If I were a business person, I wouldn't think he would be good for business. Now, I said he got somebody as a Department of Interior, Mr. Watts, or whatever his name was. I don't remember his full name, but Kenneth Watt. Yeah, Kenneth Watt told the Congress that we didn't need a forestry policy because it would be Armageddon in the year 2000. And I said, to the guy, I said, why would Weyerhaeuser want no forestry policy? Mm-hmm. I mean, if you're a big corporation, I would think you would want a forest policy, maybe one that's good for your company, but no policy? How do you come up with that stuff? I mean, why put somebody like Trump in office? It's so stupid. I mean, if you're really looking after your class interests. And he said, he said to me, and I'll never forget this, he said, well, a lot of these people really know a lot about their company, and maybe they listen to NPR on the drive home, maybe they read the Wall Street Journal, but most of them don't know anything about the world they live in.
Wow.
And I've read that in other places in business stuff, that the same thing, shallowness.
Mm-hmm.
And so you want to think that these people are simply protecting their class interests, but in fact, oftentimes they're not even doing that. They will actually, I mean, there's a famous story is the one of the buggy whip manufacturers who controlled virtually all vehicle transportation in the United States in the late 1890s. And they could have gotten into spark plugs at some point, but they didn't. And they could be doing rocket ships by now, but they're still making buggy whips. And we're in a great transition away from fossil fuel. And I'm absolutely certain that's going to happen because it's the only way we can get out of this. So they should wake up and get on board and figure out they have the capital and they have the expertise to totally monopolize regenerative energy if they want to. They could do it. They have the money, but they won't because they're just basically uneducated. They don't understand their own class interests is what I'm saying.
Wow.
So it's worse than, you know. Trump's not doing something that's good for anybody who runs a hotel in Florida, in southern Florida. I can tell you that. His climate policy is not good for Mar-a-Lago. So, I mean, he doesn't know what he's doing. It isn't in his interest to do that. That's what I wish it were. Okay, yeah.
I'm just noticing that Ms. Brandley did capture that website for Drawdown. I hope that people will go to that. Bob, I've written about 3 pages of notes from your presentation. I think that we're going to have this is a project or a presentation that's deserving a wider recognition.
Yes.
And so we will be probably processing what you have shared with us and then trying to figure a way that we can get a wider audience to listen to a future presentation. So Ms. Eviva, do you have any comments?
Sorry, just putting myself off mute. Yeah, thank you for that. I guess as the presentation was going on, I was thinking about Minneapolis and about how sort of the tension of like some people saying, well, don't go out or like wear a mask or social distance or like you could, you know, expose people to corona. And then, but then there's also the sense of like, yeah, well, I'm going to go protest because this is important to me. And it's like, there's a lot of coexisting truths. And how do you, I was thinking about the sort of the power of, from where I am as a young white person, like of Bernie Sanders campaign and getting involved in the way in which all of those issues sort of came to coalesce together in a future that felt livable and just, and how climate change can be folded into, or continues to be folded into a larger vision that can mobilize people, that will encourage like sort of uprising and mobilizing across a range of issues, so that it becomes, because I think the single issue nature of climate change is both overwhelming and also not mobilizing. For me personally, it's, yeah, and I think I wonder about how it can get enveloped into larger campaigns that are mobilizing people right now. Yeah.
Well, it's a big challenge. Like I said, is that, you know, Hurricane Harvey, and the tropical storm we just had, those things are noticed by people serious ways, and air conditioning bills are noticed by people.
Yeah.
Price of food are noticed by people, but basically this whole thing needs to be much more on people's awareness than it is. And I agree with you completely. There are so many problems out there that need fixing, and where do you start is a really, you know, I mean, there's so many problems, and it's a, but the main thing to say is that this is a real, as has been said, an existential threat. We're not going to have anybody really much living on this planet in 200 years if we don't get busy.
Well, one other thing I was thinking about that I was working on for my job was like state and federal officials, and I was noticing how, well, in Massachusetts, like the people in general that, whatever, okay, in Texas, like with the gerrymandering, like where I live, which is in a predominantly like blue area, is gerrymandered with a bunch of places that are not. And so to know that like my representative is voting for like in opposition to like the future like that you're talking about, I think that kind of like door to door, like, do you know that your representative is you know, doing this, and call them, and like you're their constituent, I think could be useful, like sort of igniting anger or like emotions and through gerrymandering and like Texas politics of like Democrats being gerrymandered to be with a bunch of Republicans or something like that. Yeah.
I would give you one more website you might find useful if you're looking for answers about realistic answers about climate change. It's called Skeptical Science. I don't know if it's skepticalscience.org or skepticalscience.com. It's one of those things. But Skeptical Science, the skeptical scientist is, pardon?
Oh, I'm on the website. Yeah.
That one contains, you know, if you end up with an argument about what is known about this, they do a really good job of basically explaining what scientists actually really think about things, as opposed to what some hothead in you know, Nebraska thinks.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah.
I think maybe you can cut and paste and put that in the chat, the URL for that.
I'm on my phone, so that's hard to do, but I wonder if someone else.
Yeah, I'm going to ask Ms. Brandley if you would capture that Skeptical Science website and put it on the chat.
Okay, I'll do that right now.
Okay, thank you. Well, folk, I think that we've had a real, I want to say a galvanizing presentation that kind of ties us all together around some common interests, common affinities, and that's what we want to do, is to lock together around what our common interests are. My closing comments before we decide upon the next meeting and the next presentation is that I'm thinking that the predicament that people of color are in is merely a weather vane for the entire nation. I think that just like automation and cybernation, the way that they hit people of color, but eventually they're going to hit other mainstream communities. This was the same thing in regard to crack cocaine. And then we have the meth epidemic, and we have the opioid epidemic following crack cocaine, which are basically hitting people of hidden majority, so-called majority white communities. So I think that we need to expand our discussion with all of the groups that can bring about the type of progressive change that we want in the country. I'm hoping that people will agree that at some point in the near future that we might can construct a part 2 where Bob can further tease out some of these powerful points that he made. So I want to give you I should say a thunderclap rather than a hand clap for I don't know if you made me a lot smarter, but I feel a little bit better about what I already know. Okay. Folk, let me hear from you all as to how we rebuild the momentum and what do you think should be next?
I think
Please, Eviva.
Oh, well, I was going to say, I'm not totally sure the sort of underlying goals of this group. I know it was called like preserving civil liberties. And so I don't feel, I'm not sure how to respond to next steps because I'm not sure what the overarching like vision is for this collective.
Yeah. I will send out some comments about the overarching vision as conceived by Brother Omowale. And I'm using the terms preserving civil liberties interchangeably with for a more perfect union, And so the central idea behind this was that we wanted to make sure that democracy does not go dark, that stress the importance of having fair elections and to make sure that November 2020, that we could have a fair election with robust participation, that there will be no suspension of the November 2020 election, that progressive policies such as continued absentee voting by mail, that the COVID crisis would not be used as a pretense to curb civil liberties, so we were trying to think about ways that we could make sure that habeas corpus wouldn't be suspended. All of those civil liberties that we have held so dear, that no strongman, authoritarian, dictator, tyrant type, or cluster of these type of personalities would look at the United States and say, we have an extraordinary chance to suspend the constitutional norms. And so this is one institution, I guess one group of people who are hoping that the institutions will hold. So that's somewhat of the thoughts system behind this, that our institutions will hold and we can get massive participation in November 2020.
So thank you for that. And I guess my quick response is sort of back to something that Randall, I think Mr. Randall was saying in the previous call about like the sort of the circular nature of saying, well, I don't want to vote for a Democrat or a Republican. They're very similar, or like I want to vote for a progressive. I read some articles about sort of like about winning and visions for the future and like not confusing unity with consensus, blah, blah, blah. And it made me want to go I personally don't like Joe Biden, but it made me want to go canvass for him, and it made me want to canvass for him to progressives And it made me, because I think that unity over consensus for getting him in the White House and saying, well, and holding Biden accountable then, like saying, don't take the votes of progressives for granted. I think like that kind of organizing, appealing to progressives, and also my perception totally warped. I'm very young and inexperienced. That like a lot of who I surround myself with are white people who say, well, I don't want to vote for him, versus like, well, why don't we stand in solidarity together against a larger message? I think that kind of work is something that I'm interested in, and I see as necessary, because a lot of people I know who are progressives aren't going to vote at this moment. They don't have an incentive to do that, which I think is really could be like the most dangerous, is really imperative to do right now, to like hold Biden accountable to not just build a cabinet that's progressive, but like build a campaign that's also has deeply progressive elements. Yeah, that would be my comment. But I also know that I'm talking a lot, so I'm going to step back.
No, I love you talking. We're probably going to go about another 10 minutes, but I wanted to say that I would recommend Madeleine Albright's book, Fascism, A Warning, because it speaks to the concern that you just raised on unity versus consensus, and the type of dialectic between unity and consensus. But I think that to the extent that we have maybe previewed some of the things that you said, I'm going to ask Shara if you would. Shara, do you have any response to what it is that she just said? Because I know you and I have talked about some of the same things, and I noticed that you made me sit erect when you told me that you didn't particularly like Joe Biden either.
No, I don't. I don't.
What was your reaction when I said that?
Well,
No.
I know when Shara told me that she didn't particularly like Joe Biden, it kind of made me sit erect. But this was before the Reid controversy. But Shara, I was asking if you might want to respond to some of these very, I guess, philosophical and pragmatic concerns that Aviva just raised.
Aviva, I think you are so on point, because I related that back to kind of your question as to how we can bring all these, what seemingly are different issues together to build a stronger front, with people still focusing on their, particular interests, but seeing how they connect. I think that is really, really important. And I think that you're asking the question about where are we going with this was really pivotal. And I think your response is one that I certainly agree with. I don't like Joe Biden, but yes, I will work for Joe Biden. But let me tell you why I don't like Joe Biden. Mm-hmm. Joe Biden still represents the same economic and political interests, only certainly a more rational version of that, more traditional mainstream version of that. Mm-hmm. He's not the answer, but he's a step in the right direction. And while we spend our energies working for him, we have to spend the same amount of energy, if not more, on these specific issues. And people who are not going to vote for Joe Biden, not everybody's going to go vote, but they do need to keep, it doesn't mean that what they're doing is not important. They need to continue that, because the real fight will come either whether Joe Biden gets elected or Trump. The real fight is going to be to influence what government does at the local level, at the state, at the federal level. So yes, to everything you said, and really appreciate your perspective.
Yeah, yours as well. Wow. Yeah. Thank you. Lots to think about there.
Yeah.
There's an old saying, work for the system during the day and against it at night.
I like that.
Yeah, totally.
That is so wise. I hadn't heard that before.
Okay. Yeah. Right.
The coexistence is good. Yeah.
No, I think that I think that this is absolutely pointing in the right direction. Eviva, I will put together some of these vision principles that
Okay.
led to the establishment of this group. A few of the people, including Brother Bustamante and Sharon, Bob, and Nancy, we had worked together on a prior project to put some wings or wind under the sail of a congressman who was pushing forward for the impeachment based upon the violation of constitutional norms of the president. And I think that we might have hit our mark, but going forward, especially after I read Madeleine Albright's, I want to call it an epic book, I realized that we were certainly not out of danger in the United States in hitting a tipping point where we could actually have an authoritarian style government. And I know that that wasn't going to work for me, and I don't think it would work for most of you all here. But so that is more or less the elementary type of unity that we have about coming together for this group. So it will probably be refined as we go forward, Eviva, and I'm hoping to get some other young people like yourself on the line as we go forward. The second thing I wanted to mention is that I'm hoping that what we can do is that we can continue to mobilize in our respective networks and spheres our friends, our coworkers, our peers, to make sure that they are mobilizing the vote. And I want to say ditto to what Cheryl said on a local level. I'm working with the Divine Nine. I don't know if you've heard of the Divine Nine, but they are basically a group of Pan-Hellenic African-American men who are led by the Alpha fraternity group, but they have 70,000 people online. Wow. 70,000 people online. I'm working with one of the key people here in Houston, and he's certainly about half my age, a civic activist. And so even though he doesn't have a great affinity for Joe Biden or mainstream politicians, he understands that if we move too far into apathy or complacency or just some inertia, that it's going to mitigate against our best futures going forward. So if we can spur the participation, we start getting dividends out of this. Now, I'm thinking that the next thing, if we could get related to what is it that we can do differently, and I think that Cheryl has some profound insights on diet and lifestyle, and it might be worthy to take a plunge into that subject matter because it's so kin to what Dr. Bob presented today. So Cheryl, I'm saying that perhaps.
Yes, that's fine. This has been really, really great. The presentation was great. The discussion was great. And I think it helps me think about how I can tie the issues together in a concise way that is very doable, but also very powerful.
Thank you. Thank you. So let's look at, so this is May 30th. What about the I guess that would be, I'm trying to look at the date for the first or second Saturday. I'm thinking about the second Saturday in the month of June. Does anybody have that date?
I think that's the 13th.
What about the 13th?
That works for me. Yeah.
That work for everybody? Bustamante,
Yes, sir.
yeah, what is?
Yes, sir. I'm here. I've been
Okay.
listening. That works for me.
Okay, well, very good then. And
For me.
wonderful, wonderful. So what I want to do is just take a moment to have a moment of silence for George Floyd, and we're going to have a moment of silence for and prayer for all of those people who have decided that they've had to put something on the line, and that this is a transformational moment in American history and the life of this nation, and they decided to go out and work for change. As you're thinking about what you might want to say, I heard a brother from the Robin Hood Foundation yesterday. He quoted a Nigerian proverb, and it basically said that children who are suffering from the lack of warmth from the village will burn the village down in order to get the warmth that they need from the village. And what I was thinking about is that for all of the young people, we're trying to plant some trees now so that they are going to have shade. And those are our children, our grandchildren, and that's Eviva and beyond, that are going to have shade from the work that we are doing now. So let's keep in mind all of those people who are suffering. And this is needless to say with this group, because I know that that's our mantra for living, is living for future generations. So I want to thank for everybody for being online. I want to apologize for a little of the confusion that we had in terms of the merging of different groups and getting the time mixed up. But this will either be under the heading of preserving civil liberties or for a more perfect union. And if you all will stay tuned, I'll be putting together and sending out some of the cardinal points that relate to trying to keep democracy from going dark. Dr. Bob, thank you. Nancy, thank you. Sheriff, thank you. Eviva, thank you. Brother Bustamante, thank you. And give our regards to Maria.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Will do.
Y'all have a good day.
God bless y'all.
Bye.
God bless everybody. And Ms. Brandon, we need to talk. Thank you.